following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, this is Carl Seidel, and welcome to The People's View. We are sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and if you want to find out more about our organization, go to nashuagop.org. And we meet at the Crown Plaza the second Thursday of every month, except in July and August. In August, we have our fundraiser stakeout at the Crown Plaza. Go to the website for more details. And today, we have Dave Schoneman as our guest. Dave is running for alderman now in Ward 3 in Nashua.
That's correct, Carl. Ward 3 in Nashua. I'm going to try the city election cycle this year.
And why should somebody want to vote for you, Dave?
Well, Carl, thank you for asking the question. I'm very pleased to have a chance to answer the question. Very pleased to be part of the community in Ward 3. My concern always with any level of government is fiscal responsibility. We talked about this last year with regard to the state races for Concord. I think the same thing is true here in Nashua. We see spending going up and we see our taxes going up. And some people say it's only 2.5% or only 3%. That only, they're talking about my money, not their money. So I think that what qualifies me first off is the focus that I have on reining in spending, and secondly, the experience that I have. I have an MBA from Boston University. I have business experience, and in business, as you know, we can't just spend ourselves to success. We have to manage income against expenses and make sure that we never go into the red. We got to stay in the black. And I think a city, while not a business, it still needs to be aware of those trade-offs, those tensions between how much is coming in and how much is going out. And I think that we just need to be very careful about not always increasing what's going out, because in the end it requires that we have to increase what's coming in, which means coming out of our own, more taxes. Exactly, more taxes.
And do you have any particular areas you want to aim at, or just the budget as a whole, or is there? Well,
the main job of the alderman is to approve any expenditures the city has. And the biggest cycle for that is the budget cycle. So I'd like to look at the budget overall. We have a lot of salaries that went up this time. There's a lot of controversy was reported in the various newspapers about how much salaries are going up. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't go up, but I'm saying that personnel is a huge portion of the budget. We need to be very careful with positions that we're creating, raises that we're giving out. We want to make sure that whatever we do on a city level matches what would happen in the private sector. And it's very hard to do that because cities don't compete. Cities aren't a business. They're not out there competing. It's just a number that someone says, well, you know, we ought to give them some more. And I don't want to make it sound too cavalier. I'm sure that those who are making those decisions aren't taking it in a cavalier manner. But nevertheless, we need to be very careful about how much we're spending in total, how many positions we have in total, and do we need to add extra positions? I've heard a lot of talk about the city stat positions and the city stat operation. Do we really need this? This is really benefiting the city. I can see that it's benefiting certain individuals within government with more information, but does the taxpayer really see that as a benefit?
You know, you bring up a good point. One of the things that I have as a pet peeve in Concord, and when we ask the agencies there to justify their budget, how do they evaluate whether the money that they had spent in the past has been spent well? Are they in programs that are really doing what they were supposed to do? And are we getting the bang for the buck that we deserve? Or are we just spending what we think is absolutely necessary without really evaluating the value?
Well, that's I think a very good question. I think that any kind of government spending, once it's begun, it's very hard to pull it back. And that's why we have to look at it so closely before we expand anything. It's just very, very difficult to pull it back. If there's unions involved, again, nothing against a union, but there's going to be resistance to shrinkage in the workforce. Whereas in a private company, it would be very clear these are the kinds of things we need to do. Unfortunately, the economy is still not doing real well. We hear people being let go all the time. It's just much harder within a governmental environment to shrink. And so there might be measures that could be done, or perhaps even are being done, to determine whether or not we're getting the money out of these programs that we think we should. But even if the measure doesn't come up quite right, the question is, can we really do the shrinking? There's a couple of things that are happening here in the city of Nashua, which I think might pertain to that. I talked to people in Ward 3 and all around the city, and there seems to be a lot of controversy about the sidewalk project.
Yes.
The sidewalk project, I think, is a case in point where we've got the Board of Public Works. Public Works is constructing this. And if Public Works is doing this city sidewalk project, they're not doing other things in the city. So do those other things in the city need to be done? If they don't need to be done, then perhaps we should have done something about the size of the Public Works budget, rather than just spend the money that we know is going to be there anyway on a project that doesn't have full buy-in from the citizens of Nashua.
There are other projects that they're doing too. I mean, they're working on Greeley Park. They're doing something on the tree streets. They're doing a number of other little items around. They're fixing up areas. They're building a dog walk or whatever it is in certain places. Yeah, you have to weigh those things one against the other, and maybe you don't do all of them now. You do 2 or 3, and you save the rest for later.
Yep, I think that's certainly a possibility. One other possibility is to not use city workers to do it, because we really don't know how much the sidewalk project costs, for instance. Right. There were no competitive bids. We didn't put it out to bid, so we really don't know. Same with the Broad Street project. That's going to be Public Works. Now, perhaps that should be Public Works, but we have no idea what it really costs. And if we don't have an idea what it really costs, how can we possibly measure the value that we're getting for it?
And I think you're also really playing on the fact that some of these projects are just fairly big, require a significant amount of people, but they only last for 3 or 4 years, or maybe 5 years. And then what do you do with the people? Then, you don't like to lay those people off. So that's one reason why you look outside to hire companies to do these things.
Right.
And so you're going to evaluate that. That's one of the things that you want to look into if you get elected.
I think it's one of the things we have to look into, because if something is put out to bid, then the aldermen have a say in any expenditure.
Right.
When it's something like the city sidewalk project or downtown sidewalk project, the aldermen don't have a say because the budget has already been approved. So it goes straight to the Board of Public Works, and the aldermen don't really have the say that they ought to. One of the reasons for going with an outside contractor is that you can easily ramp up or ramp down. You can buy the project or not, and you know exactly what it's going to cost. Internally, like you said, it's hard to know what it costs, and then once the project is done, then what do we do? Because perhaps we're doing the project to avoid the hard questions that we know are going to come up in 2 or 3 years anyway. So we use the expression a lot in Washington, often kicking the can down the road. Maybe we're kicking the can down the road, but unfortunately here, we've seen every time the can gets kicked, our taxes go up 2.5%, because every year we're hearing somebody say, it's only 2.5% more than it was last year. And 2.5%, again, only, they're not talking about their money. When they say only, they're talking about my money and all taxpayers.
Right, and why not hold the line,
Why not hold the line? It's hard, right. I understand the pressures associated with it, but we need to really think about holding the line.
Well, what other areas you were looking at? We were talking about Greeley Park. That's in your ward.
Greeley Park is in Ward 3, and that is a gem of Nashua. What a beautiful landscape. There's a proposal to carve out a chunk of Greeley Park for a special playground, fenced-in playground for autistic children. And Greeley Park is, as we say, a gem. It's available to the entire public, all residents of Nashua, and I'm sure some from out of town. I was there for Memorial Day. We had a wonderful picnic out there. It's a special space. There are no fenced-in areas no areas that are set aside specifically for a particular group. And as worthwhile as a playground would be for autistic children, Greeley Park may not be the best place for them to be. First off, it will carve up a portion of the park. Now an area is fenced in or fenced off to other people, potentially. Then what happens if there's another group that comes next year with an equally worthwhile request? Now we have to carve another section off. I was talking with Dan Moriarty, Alderman Dan Moriarty, who's running for Alderman at Large this year, and he says in Ward 9 there's a park that would be ideally suited to that particular need. So I'd like to try to find a way to accommodate that particular segment of the population while at the same time preserving Greeley Park. It's a wonderful space, and it's tranquil. It's green. It's open. It's just a really, really great space, and I think we need to do the best that we can with the trust that we've been given for that park and preserve it for generations to come.
Okay, are there any other problems with Greeley Park or that you see that you'd like to see changed or anything?
That's the main thing that I've seen with Greeley Park is just that proposal. If there's any crime issues or anything like that, you know, obviously we have to be careful on making sure that it remains safe, but I haven't seen any particular issue other than this proposal.
What about, isn't part of, I'm not sure if this is part of Ward 3 or not, close to the river? Do you go all the way over to the river or just to the railroad tracks in Ward 3?
Downtown here, we come to the railroad tracks.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think you're down to going east. That must be Ward 4.
Okay.
Or Ward.
Yeah, I have to check a ward map to make sure.
Yeah. Okay, what other things are we looking at that you're interested in being involved in when elected?
Well, we've talked about finance.
Right.
That's very important. We've talked about accountability, and I think accountability is an issue with regard to the projects that are being done by Board of Public Works rather than going through the alderman and for an outside bid. I think that's an accountability issue. I think there's also an issue that's come up recently that I would label integrity or a fairness issue. And I'm speaking about the VFW. Now, the VFW issue has been resolved. It was resolved on Tuesday night in the aldermanic chambers when the resolution was tabled. But there was a resolution that was put forward by a number of aldermen. I think 3 or 4 were on initially, and 2 of them backed off once they found out what the real nature of it seemed to be. But there was a proposal that was targeting, it seemed to be targeting a specific group, namely the VFW. We've seen this kind of thing in government before. And we've seen it in Washington just recently with the IRS, where the IRS is using their authority to target conservative groups, target the Tea Party. And whatever a person's politics, that should be put aside when a government entity is involved and a request for information or for cooperation or help is made. No position of power should be used to target a group or individual. So here in Nashua, we had a proposal that was to ban the service of alcohol within 500 feet of a school. And it came at a particular time when the VFW was seeking to move into new space that was within 500 feet of an elementary school. Also interesting with that proposal is that it exempted Holman Stadium, which is right next to Amherst Street School. So here we have Holman Stadium, a city-owned property that serves alcohol, that is exempted from this ordinance. Meanwhile, it's timing-wise seemed to be discussed and proposed right at a time when the VFW is seeking to move into new space. It seems to be, and again, I'm not inside those aldermen's heads, and I'm not going to be accusatory, but we do need to wonder. I think people were wondering very seriously, is this an issue where someone was targeting?
They didn't even want to amend it to include the VFW as exempt.
Right, they wouldn't even do that.
So you wonder.
You really wonder. So on Tuesday there was a hearing, and I read about it in the paper. I was not there myself, but the VFW, these elderly soldiers, stood up and defended themselves. And what's interesting to me is that here, I would call it a misuse of power. And the challenge, you know, the pushback came from the VFW. These veterans of foreign wars who fought on foreign soil to protect our freedoms stood up on Tuesday night to protect our freedoms. And I really have to give them a tremendous amount of credit. And again, it just increases my debt of gratitude to them, because this is a line of defense people pushing back on a government that was acting in an onerous manner. And there are those who would say, well, we're doing it for the children, but there was a side issue there.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right. You know, we owe something to those veterans.
Yes.
And they have a history of not having any problems in the place where they were. They had a home in a very congested area.
Yes.
No record of any kind of a problem.
Yep.
And you wonder.
You really do. But going back 30 years, the
Yeah.
only issue that ever occurred was a
Yeah.
brawl that happened 30 years ago. And the veterans, we trust them to defend us. Why can't we trust them to drink responsibly? And it's not a drinking club anyway.
No.
It's a place where these guys hang out and share their stories and share their memories.
There's always been a lot of political things there, too, that
Yes.
have been handled very well.
Yes, that's right.
No crowds, no noises, stuff of that nature. But anyway, one other issue I was wondering we could talk about a little bit, Broad Street Parkway and what's happening with that in the town. I mean, that's going to be a big thing for the town. It might be a big pain in the neck, too. It's not in your ward, I don't think. It doesn't touch your ward, but it borders it.
It borders the ward.
Yeah.
And it's certainly something that the aldermen ought to be involved in. And it's a done deal from what I understand. The construction is underway. I drove down Broad Street just today, and you can see they're knocking down that building there.
Right.
And I use a service station nearby there, and that gentleman says that he's going to have to move, and the city's bought out his
Really?
property. At
Oh.
Gate City Tire right there,
Oh.
Gate City Auto, I believe. Yep, he's going to be having to move. He's
So
been there
that's
for a long time.
to broaden the entrance of that
Yes, that's
parkway?
right. That's right. So, the Broad Street Parkway might be one of those things that, if they had done it years and years ago, we might walk down it and say, "Gee, I'm sure glad they did this then,"
Yeah.
because we'd never do it today.
Yeah.
But here we are doing it today. I understand circumstances were quite a bit different. The Route 3 hadn't been expanded, for instance, when the whole thing was proposed years ago. I wasn't here in Nashua in those days. But it's a proposal that was around for a long time. And I think the assumption was that circumstances hadn't really changed. But of course, they have, as they always do. So here's a very expensive project. Again, that we really don't know how expensive it is. Because it's not bid.
Yeah, they trimmed it as much as they could in doing the planning, and going down to a 2-lane road, you sometimes wonder if it's really adequate enough.
Yeah,
That was one of my thoughts when they were, arguing back and forth.
right.
You're right. If they did it 20 years ago or 30 years ago when it was first presented, it might have been better.
Right.
And how is it going to affect the areas down near the city? It's nice. It is a nice thing if it does alleviate the traffic, because I know there's certain times of days I won't go down Broad Street.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's very busy. I live close to Broad Street.
Yeah.
It's my route primarily to get to Route 3, and I don't like to use it either. I avoid those times. But we really have to kind of wonder, was that the best thing to do? And I think that the sense that people have is that it was pushed and crammed, and I think people have an issue with that. I was talking to some folks about the upcoming rail project, the discussion about the rail project. There was a discussion in the aldermanic chambers on Monday evening. Dan Moriarty proposed to put together an ad hoc committee to take a very careful look, pros and cons, at the rail and how it's going to affect the city of Nashua, and also really to be a liaison between the Board of Aldermen and the study that's being done through Concord. And it was squashed. And it's really kind of surprising, I think, that it contributes to the notion or to the belief in the minds of some voters that we really don't have a say, that people in government want to do what they want to do, and they're going to do it and don't want to hear anything otherwise. This feasibility study coming out of Concord is most likely going to be biased pro.
Yeah, well, there was an argument up there. I don't know if you read that in the papers, where DOT is spending something like $25,000, $40,000 to $30,000 to educate the people on the benefits of it.
Right.
And that is a little bit skewed as far as I was concerned.
Certainly is.
I was one of the few, I guess, from Nashua that voted against that granting, because the commission that we have wants to do everything. And again, you don't have to do everything and
Right.
do it once, because once you make that commitment, you can't really turn back.
You
And
really
that's what
can't.
that's the way they get their foot in the door, and then pretty soon the crowd rushes through, and we're paying for everybody.
And we're going to pay. It's going to be expensive.
They're very expensive.
Very expensive. The ridership simply isn't going to be there.
And I can't understand why we can't do it in piecemeal. I would be for, when the mayor is actually looking into this, but I don't know how far she's gotten, I don't know how much support she gets, bring it up to Pheasant Lane Mall. Let Massachusetts pay for that, because they want to get their people downtown.
Sure.
And they'll also take our people downtown.
Yep.
You know, if we have a station down there at Pheasant Lane Mall, you probably could handle the traffic better.
Yes.
If you do it between Pheasant Lane Mall and where the bridge is across the road, someplace in there,
Yep.
you could have a nice station.
Yes.
Then if you justify that and you get the rails straightened out a little bit, then maybe you go into the city of Nashua.
Sure.
And if that works out, then you go to the Manchester airport. If that
Sure.
works out, downtown Manchester. But high-speed rail, you don't need high-speed rail. You need
No.
maybe 50 miles an hour rail.
Yeah. It isn't that far. You're not going to save
And
anything.
then
right
you
now.
go up to Concord at that. And after that, I don't know how they justify it. They only could justify it, in my mind, by freight. You know, I don't think people are going to commute between Boston and Montreal or wherever it would end up by train.
No.
I mean, they do it by plane.
Sure.
Nobody wants to commute, and nobody's going to work that far away.
No. No, I don't think so either. And we take a look at Route 3, any particular time of day. Look at all those cars
Yeah,
going by.
that's right.
How many trains would it take to move that many people?
Yeah.
The same on the
Well,
same trip.
the problem too with the train is it only stops in a certain place, wherever the tracks go.
Exactly.
The bus system that we have now seems to be working out. They are able to handle all the passengers. Maybe they don't run as late as people would like, but they seem to handle it. And if they find differences where maybe people want to be dropped off someplace in, say, 128, you know, a couple of different places, maybe Waltham or Newton.
Sure.
And, you know, they could easily have one going out that direction.
Easily. And if they wanted to change their mind,
Yeah.
we can change our mind and do it differently next week. That's the way to go. Because once you lay the rail, that's it. It's
right.
just going there. And we really don't have a society that was built around rail
No.
the same way that Europe was. And I think
Or Japan.
Or Japan. And I think we tend to look at these planners, look at these other countries and try to sell us on, you know, it works so well for them. But these are cultural things, tied in with culture. And we are an automobile culture. We're an independent culture. And we have all this space. We've historically had all this space in America, and people want to get on the road and get off and go where they want to go. And we lose a lot of that. So I don't think it's going to be quite as easy. I don't think people who are in these cars are going to be, all of them, jumping onto a train.
No, I think that's right. And, you know, you can see it in Europe. One of the things they use to subsidize the rail is the higher tolls on the roads. I know in France, I was very surprised the first time I had to use how high the tolls are.
Really?
But that helps pay for some of the high-speed rail that they have in France.
Well, that just shows that high-speed rail is not paying for itself. I know when Governor Lynch was still in office, he says, well, we subsidize the roads.
Yeah.
We subsidize everything, he said. Let's just subsidize the rail. Well, we can't keep on subsidizing everything. And I think that the subsidy per passenger mile on rail would be much higher than
That's the
subsidy
other
per
part of
passenger
it.
mile
I think
in a car.
you can look at what's going up on the train from Maine. I mean, they've been taking it from all sorts of funds to subsidize more than 50% of the cost of that.
It just is too expensive. And there are certain areas, places of a densely populated city area, you know, streetcars or subways or whatnot. Absolutely, it's the right way to go. But
Well, Dave,
Nashua downtown, no.
You're going to be running again coming up in the fall for election. How would people get in touch with you? How would they see if they could help you, either with a donation or help, or how would they do that?
Well, I'd be very happy to have any contact. I have a website. It's nhthinks.com. NH, of course, is for New Hampshire, so newhampshirethinks.com. It's a place where we can discuss issues, and if someone's got a question or a comment, I'm glad to hear it. I've got a blog spot on there, and I post news there, too. My telephone number is 603-809-4944. 5204. And I'm very glad to hear from anyone who would like to call again with question or comment. Donations would certainly always be appreciated. Fortunately, these races are not terribly expensive, but there
You
is a
still
cost
have to
associated with it.
hand out some kind of literature to get
That's
people
right.
familiar with you.
That's right.
And you'd be happy to talk to people on the phone or whatever.
Certainly would.
And we'll
Stop
have you
by and
back
talk
here
with
in
them.
the fall so you can give another little pitch as we interview all the candidates. That
Well,
go
thanks very
through.
much, Carl. It's been a
Okay.
pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And thank you all for listening in. And don't forget, this is sponsored by the Nashua GOP. And go to the NashuaGOP.org website, and hopefully you'll stop by and see some of the candidates as they appear at our fundraisers during the coming months. So look at our website again and tune in to The People's View. Thank you very much for listening in.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.